Yeah, that won't do. How about this one? No. I'll tell you what, I'll just start the podcast. Hello, welcome back to Andrew Culture's podcast. It may not surprise you to know my name is Andrew Culture, and therefore this is my podcast. Now, if you've heard the podcast before, you'll know that I like to gather interesting people around me, kind of people I know, people I've worked with quite often, and people who I think have made interesting and possibly quite brave decisions with their lives. If you've not heard this podcast before, you needn't worry. This isn't a heavy one. It tends to be fairly light-hearted, but I like finding people who have done things that other people perhaps wouldn't have the balls to be honest. And I have with me here today Mr. Michael Perry, who I think I've known you, 2 or 3 years.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and we've kind of worked together kind of on and off for quite a long time. So, Mr. Michael Perry, would you like to give yourself a very brief introduction?
Of course. You need to give my pseudonym too, which is Mr Plant Geek.
It's a pretty big fail of mine. Because it kind of,
no worries.
When I say we've worked together, I've worked on Michael's marketing. So yeah, God, that's off-brand of me. Terrible. Anyway, you carry on.
No worries. So what do I do? What did I do? Do you want the whole story or just want a preface?
Tell us what you've done in. Actually, you can't even say the last few months because it's been unusual times. If you bumped into someone in an elevator and had to give them an elevator pitch of what you do, that's
really good. That's a really good way of putting it. Okay, so my brand is Mr Plant Geek, and this is all about putting across plants, horticulture, gardening to a really mixed demographic in the simplest and most fun way. So I do that by lectures, demos, workshops, anywhere in Europe, anywhere in the world. Also do various live TV, bit of product development, which is where a lot of my heritage is, following my career with Thomson & Morgan. And if you Google me, you'll find all sorts of crazy pictures, maybe a few naked calendar pictures. But more importantly, you'll see pictures of some of the plants that I've introduced, such as the egg and chips plant and the fuchsia berry. And we took those onto TV shows as well. So I think a nice rounded kind of experience. Are we at the top floor yet?
I think you can tell, I think listeners will be able to tell that you are an experienced broadcaster and speaker with that. My kind of stumbling start. But okay, well, let's quickly kind of trip through your journey here because I know that you used to work at Thomson & Morgan with my friend Sue. Where were you before then? I tell you what, let's go
school.
Well, school. Okay, let's start there.
Yeah.
So some of the people I've spoken to didn't get on with school. Some of them loved school. How was your school experience?
Have you ever seen the film Romeo and Michelle's High School Reunion?
I thought you were going to say St Trinian's.
Close. Romeo and Michelle's High School Reunion. Do you know that?
No.
No? Okay. That's the sort of film that really sums up my school experience. Like, it wasn't the best. I certainly wasn't a popular kid, I kind of bullied for various things, kind of ostracized for various things, and didn't really enjoy it day to day. But somehow, with me and my best friend, we had a really nice time, but just kind of on the sidelines, just in our own little world. And if you watch that film, you'll see exactly the same story, like, following through that film. So, yeah, I would say it was kind of a real school period of kind of lying low, not really rising above the parapet, kind of doing fairly well with A's and B's, I would say.
That's pretty good, good.
Particularly like geography. What else? Gardening? No, well, gardening was the thing I was keeping secret from my school friends.
Keeping secret?
Yeah, because in those days, it wasn't cool to love plants. It was something you would potentially be bullied for, and the connotations of then, being called I don't know, like a Nancy or a pansy because you're working with plants, and that really wasn't the thing to do.
It's so strange now. I mean, I'm not going to give away your age, but Michael and I are a similar age, so we were at school. Let's put a broad margin on it. We were at school between 1980 and the year 2000. How's that? Is that broad enough?
I don't know if I'm that ashamed of my age.
No, okay. Well, so I think I was at school 87 to 92 high school.
I left in 96, so.
Oh God, I am much older than you then.
Yeah.
Right, you can't see us, but I have like wickedly Brillo pad grey hair, and Michael really doesn't. Right, so school. It is wild that I mean, in my mind, 1996 is still recent, but gardening was still something that...
Yeah, well, to be honest, being an individual wasn't supported. I remember, when there was like the trendy jacket that everybody had to have. It probably wasn't your time, but there was one called a naff jacket that if you didn't have that, you weren't cool. And kind of there was always, so everybody had to be the same. And so if you were doing some sort of hobby that was kind of off the wall like that, and especially one that was seen as slightly feminine, then you didn't want to let people know that. But regardless, I kind of laid low, went to high school, obviously had lots of fun with my best friend kind of on the side, started to garden a lot in my parents' garden and with my grandparents. And
is that where the interest started?
Yeah, it really came from my grandparents. So even, some of my earliest memories are just in the garden, taking cuttings, stamping on earwigs. Cut that bit out. She used to teach me this way of catching them in these like hay-filled pots, and then they drop out on the floor, and that's when you stamp them out and get rid of them.
I'm fascinated by gardening. I mean, as soon as Michael came into the studio here, I've got a tree begonia which has gone berserk, and that was the first thing we talked about. But just before I came out, there's still a lot of gardening things that really surprise me.
Yeah.
Just before I came out, my daughter, who's 9, it's like, "Oh, you've been in the garden a while. So what are you doing?" She said, "Oh, just drowning caterpillars." And I was like, "Doing what?"
Casual.
No, she said, "Well, there's lots on the box, and they're going to get box blight." So I was just picking them off, and I was like, "She's 9," and mind you, I'm still upset when my wife puts plants that look okay to me in the brown bin.
Yeah.
I'm like, "What are you doing? It looks fine." She's like, No, it's not. It's going to turn. I don't need it anymore.
I'd be the same, to be honest. Yeah.
That's horrible. It looks so beautiful. You're just chucking it. Anyway, we're going off. So school was not terrible. But
obviously I had this interest with my grandparents. I was going with them most weeks to the WI market. I actually became a WI member when I was, 12 years old.
I don't know if it's outside the UK, WI. But let's explain to non-English people what it is.
Yeah, WI stands for Women's Institute. And this is an organisation that does lots of different activities for women, but they also have a market, which is, I assume it's still there on a Thursday in Ipswich.
I don't know.
And in various towns around the side. And it's great. You take your produce there, you sell it, you make money. I was 12-year-old, making all my own pocket money. So it was fantastic, really.
Anyone not in Britain, not familiar, has probably seen the film Calendar Girls, and I think that's probably a fairly accurate representation. What sort of things were you making and taking to sell?
Lots of plants. So obviously taking cuttings, bringing them to sale. I was also being slightly savvy and also buying cheaper plants in some places and then selling those for bigger prices at the market. 12. Yeah, I was quite an entrepreneur even at that age, really. And I don't know where that really came from, but my dad never gave me any pocket money. I think the first time he gave me some money was when I was 26 or something for a holiday.
Wow.
And it was just bizarre because I was earning all my own money. I didn't need it.
Speaking as someone who did a rural paper ground, I think I would have preferred to sell plants. I think that sounds like a much nicer thing to do.
But it was pretty cool. And this is really what kept my sanity, at the weekends. But obviously this was a hobby I wasn't telling my friends about. I started selling herbs through mail order as well. Right. And this is probably when I'm 14. And I remember putting adverts in the back of BBC Gardener's World magazine.
Really?
And selling these plants. And I had this, I can remember now, I've got some copies at home, the catalogue, 1997 edition, I think I've got at home, which is printed, really, really crappily on an old, not even word processor.
A catalogue put together by you?
Yeah. It was kind of like a pile of 20 A4 pages.
That wasn't meant to sound like disbelief then. That was more kind of impressed at the ingenuity of it, I think.
So this was my catalogue, and I used to send that out to people that inquired. Then I'd send the orders out. And don't for a minute think this is big scale. I probably had 30 orders in the lifetime of the company. But it kind of gave me that kind of real eagerness to earn money and to know that you can earn your own money as well, and to also be focused on making money out of plants, which is kind of sometimes shrewdly what I would say I do now, really. It's kind of, I love plants, but I also love making money out of them, of course. So it's
kind of the dream. Just the dream with a lot of I can't call plantsmanship a hobby, really. I was going to say it's the same with a lot of hobbies. Kind of the great thing is finding a way to make a living from it.
Yeah.
So how about you did GCSEs? You then go on to A-levels?
No, so I did the GCSEs. I didn't really think ahead of what I could do afterwards because...
You were rolling in cash.
Well, no, not necessarily, but I didn't feel... I wasn't that confident in those days. I was a really, really shy boy. I wasn't, obviously I didn't have many friends. I was just kind of had, my plants. So I wasn't really thinking, I could go and do A-levels or in sixth form. It kind of just felt a bit socially impossible, really. And that... it feels silly now, but that probably held me back from a lot of stuff. But it just so happens that everything turned out fine without that. But so I kind of, I kissed away the chance of doing A-levels for confidence, I guess.
It's bizarre looking back that we were able to leave school at 16. That seems like a really strange thing now. It's a rubbish young age to kind of figure out.
When do they leave now then? Is it different?
Kids have to stay in school till they're 18.
Really?
Or have to stay in an educational thing. So they can do an apprenticeship or whatever, but they can't. I went to rural high school and there was a significant number of kids. I went to Thomas Mills in Fram, Framlingham, Suffolk boy, Fram, and it wasn't unusual for kids to leave on their 16th birthday. So in the last year, they'd leave, this 6, 7, 8 months before GCSE exams. So they'd just dump out. And they'd head off to, it's such a cliche, they'd head off to drive tractors and things like that. So kids have to stay until they're 18. So what did you do? If you didn't do A-levels, what was the next step?
Well, I kind of went off to drive tractors.
Did you really?
Because I got to the end of the school year and the careers advisor, there used to be this thing where they filled in information, then it spat out this piece of paper with suggestions.
Yeah, I had that.
And it was kind of like really predictable stuff. So if somebody tells you they're interested in plants and flowers, they'll say, why don't you be a landscape gardener or why don't you be a florist? And those things didn't really interest me. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew it wasn't that. So the most obvious next move was a national diploma in horticulture, which was then at Otley College.
Yeah.
And that is what I then did after school, but I was still painfully shy. But thankfully, our class was only 12 people, and we all made friends relatively quickly. And it was the first time I felt like I belonged, so that was very nice. But also, it was a very enjoyable course for 2 years.
It is a real difference. I did a BTEC ND as well. Mine was in... it doesn't matter. But I found the same thing, kind of at school, kind of hiding away from the dickheads and sort of trying to... Well, I was usually in trouble, but not fitting in. Very much that dissociation. Whereas when we got to college, the message was, look, if you don't like this, you can just piss off and do something else. And that does change the way I think everyone in the class reacts. And people you just sort of seem to make better friendships. I think you feel like a grown-up. Even though you're 16, you're like, well, I've chosen to be here now, and this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, so that really worked for me, and it was really enjoyable. It was a very mixed course, so it had everything from biology side, plant identification, all the way through to driving tractors, sports turf class. A lot of those things I wasn't good at, actually. See, look, because I'm surprisingly not that practical.
See, when I said, like, again, if you're not from a rural community or not from Suffolk, when I said left school to drive tractors, that's in no way to mean. In fact, I think it's quite cool. At my school, there was a whole bunch of kids who didn't get into punch-ups over which was the best football team. They'd get into punch-ups over what was the best brand of tractor. And honestly, there'd be literal fisticuffs at the back of classes with someone going, none of that case shit, that rubbish, what you want is Massey Ferguson. And they would literally come to blows over it. So tractors in this area, they are not for messing, they're important.
But I couldn't drive them, so... so that didn't really come natural to me, but a lot of the stuff did, and we obviously did lots with plants and designs. We did a garden at Suffolk show. Cool. Kind of on the back of that at the same time, I also started doing some work for a garden designer in Woodbridge, a guy called Paul Miles, who's now sadly died. But he introduced me to a lot of different places. He used to take me to a lot of the gardens that he designed. I used to source plants for him as well, so very... That's specialist plant varieties, and Yeah, it was really fun, and he introduced me to some amazing people as well.
So when you said you used to source plants, how did you go about that? Did you were saying that you used to sell your own from a catalogue?
Yeah.
And obviously this is before the age of being able to just fire up a bunch of websites and look. How did you source them? Did he tell you, this is the exact plant I need?
Yeah, because he put together very specific garden designs, so it would be, specific plants down to the variety. So it wouldn't be just any old iris. It would be Iris Jane Phillips, for example.
Okay.
So, sorry.
That's right.
So how did I find those?
Because that is incredibly specific.
Yeah, I had a fax machine.
Wow.
I don't know why I had a fax machine. I also had a photocopier. I think I had an obsession with having my own mini office or something. It was really strange.
It's playing at grown-ups again.
I know. But it's like this photocopier is probably the most expensive thing I bought while I was a teenager. I don't know why.
Probably the size of a family car as well.
Yeah.
They were huge.
Anyway, so that was, what did you ask me about photocopiers for?
No, I didn't.
Where was I?
You just crowbarred photocopies into the conversation. And
right.
I went with it.
How did I source the plants? There you go. RHS used to print a plant finder, which is a book, which is like a directory of where each plant is from.
Okay.
So that almost, if you can imagine, that was like Google, but in book form. So you could find any plant you wanted. You could find the nursery. You could find where to buy it from. And I assume, maybe, I can't remember how I did it. I don't think I would have rung them up because I probably wouldn't have felt that confident. Maybe I sent them a fax and asked if they had the plants available.
It just sounds like a massive task. It sounds like
guess
you're doing
so.
this while you were at Otley College.
Just kind of on the side. And some stuff would be obviously sent by mail order, or it might be that I would, drive to nurseries such as, I remember going to Langthorne's Plantery at Dunmow quite a few times for a lot of specialist plants, Wootton's at Wenniston, walled gardens. So yeah, it was fun though, and I loved the challenge of kind of narrowing it down and trying to get that exact plant that was needed for the plan.
I've got to say, at that age, it does sound like a cool job to have.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of a lot of jobs available around here at that age are industrial jobs or kind of. There is honestly a job called a chicken chaser. And back when I was on the dole, the only jobs that were ever available in Woodbridge were chicken chaser jobs. And there was no way I was going to be a chicken chaser. No. So I think it sounds like you're already kind of forming this thing of being master of your own destiny.
I guess so, but remember, this was only a casual kind of evening and, weekends job. This wasn't anything necessarily official, so I was just doing this work for him. I was also helping with his filing, doing some typing from time to time, all alongside my college course. Towards the end of college, again, I wasn't, I don't know if I'm still the same now, but I never think that far ahead. I prefer to kind of just wait, see all the options, be reactive. I've never really, if you ask me what am I doing next year, I don't have some master plan, but I think that makes you more agile in order to pick up the opportunities along the way that can become big. Yeah. I don't believe in being too rigid with a plan. And I think that's part of my success is being changeable and agile.
I think some people kind of feel a certain amount of security in planning everything out. But I'm with you. I don't know the variables. So I don't, what I mean is I don't know what's going to come. So I don't want to make things too structured because I'm terrified of missing out on things.
That's very much the same. Yeah. But like I say, that has really, it's done me well, really, over the years. So I was getting to the end of college. I didn't know what I was going to do. Didn't even think ahead. It was probably May, June. If you bear in mind, that's the end of college. If I remember rightly, I probably left college without anything to go to, but somehow just didn't think ahead, wasn't really even worried about it. I knew I didn't want to go to university because, again, I'd found my nice group of college friends, but at the same time, I wasn't really confident in the outside world, so I wasn't really wanting to kind of, do that social side of uni.
So you've kind of had your bubble, which is a word that's been kind of co-opted recently. But no, you form a bubble. I think as a young adult, you start, people you like and share common interests start to gravitate towards you, don't they?
Definitely. And at that age, I wouldn't have wanted to leave, not necessarily my house, but my hometown for sure. I felt a bit more kind of nervous to do that. But anyway, what happened? Local newspaper, Evening Star. Do you remember it? I think it's called the Ipswich Star. It's called the Ipswich Star 24 now, I think. They had a competition to design a garden, and that garden was set to be built at Thompson & Morgan. a very famous mail order company who are based here in Ipswich, who I used to buy seeds from when I was 12 years old, running that nursery.
And reselling them.
Yeah. No. And I put a design together. I had a little bit of advice from the garden designer guy that I worked with. He suggested filling it with all plants that were raised in Suffolk. So a lot of pinks, miniature carnations that are bred at Mendlesham near Stowmarket.
Okay.
Iris poppies that are bred at Benton End in Hadley. So it had that really nice kind of marketing twist to it. And I won the competition. What did I win? I think a greenhouse and some seeds.
You won a greenhouse?
Yeah, but that wasn't the biggest thing I won, because a week later I wrote in and asked for a job, and they gave me a job.
Wow.
So then I had a job, and I started on the 6th of July, must be 1998.
I've got to know what you did with the greenhouse, though. Did you just give it to your parents?
It was at my parents' Well, my parents' garden was really my garden, to be honest, so it just kind of went there. Yeah, and it's still there now in the Dales.
Wow. Definitely a good prize then.
Yeah, it was a really good greenhouse, actually.
So Thompson Morgan gave you a job?
Yeah, so I wrote in, because in those days you wrote letters, which seems so archaic now.
You didn't use your fax?
I know, no. Yeah, and they replied, and there was a guy called Martin Frower, who was the horticultural manager. He brought me in for an interview. Remember, I'm still a painfully shy 18-year-old at this stage. And he kind of took a punt on me, and he could see that I had a natural interest in plants. He was sourcing new seed varieties for the catalogue, so it was very exciting to shadow him on his work. And I remember I used to have a little in tray, because in those days there was no email or any...
Dude, we're going to come across... We're sounding like we're ancient.
But the thing is, I can't imagine now how we filled our time. It seems weird, because everything must have worked so much more slowly.
I honestly can't remember.
Weird, yeah.
And the thing that
and to
fascinates
find out
me,
information must have been grueling.
we're not talking about 200 years ago.
Oh!
Yeah, we're talking... Well, less than... Well, sort of 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's not that long ago.
Yeah, it's mad. So anyway, I remember this, like, I always used to keep an eye on of his out tray as well, because he would give me projects to work on. So it would be like, oh, he's seen an article about blue amaryllis. Can you try and track this down? There would be like a book that he'd seen. I then had to order it, so I then might need to send a fax to America, or all of this kind of like cute officey stuff, but with a nice plant taste to it all. And so I was doing that. We started to go on different trips. I remember we used to follow up on a lot of new customer varieties in those days. So it would be a customer would call us up and say, I've got this poppy that has fringed petals, and that's not normal. What do you think is something different? And then we would ask for a picture, and then potentially we would go and then bring the poppy and then produce it. And the customer would then get a certain amount of money per packet that was sold.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, a lot of new introductions were brought in that way. We drove all the way to London once to get a black-flowered delphinium. I flew to Scotland, Glasgow, when I was just 18. I think it was my first task to collect a star-shaped petunia. So that was it.
Just wild.
But the thing is, it always felt so wild and extravagant. But
it was.
If you've got,
even now looking back,
but at the end of the day, if you've got a brand new variety and it costs you, £1,000 for the trip to get it, what you make back in the long run is worth that. So we really took the risk on these varieties, bringing them back, and it was really exciting. Yeah, and I started to put together a lot of the copy for the catalogues to write the back of the seed packets. Started to be involved in the breeding program, did a little bit of practical breeding from time to time, just for kind of, practice, just kind of, job swap in different apartments, that sort of style. And yeah, really loved it. Really got on well with my boss, Martin. Went on my first overseas trip. Had to get a passport for it.
Wow.
Never been abroad before at 18 years old. And went on this first trip to Holland, which is an actual specific place that I've just been back to 3 weeks ago. So it was really nice to go back
same
there.
Place.
Yeah. Down in the south, where we used to visit the field trials and look for new varieties again, and drive around lots of crop fields looking at what was different that we could list in the catalogue. So
just for listeners who aren't familiar with where we are, we're recording this on the 18th of August 2020, and we're in Ipswich. And as the crow flies, Holland is closer to us than London.
Yeah.
And London is only 80,
Yeah.
90 miles. So Holland is very close, but not very easy to get to. I've got no idea why the ferry takes like 10 hours.
Yeah, true. There used to be a fast ferry that was 4 hours
Cool.
from Harwich, but now it is the overnight
Sorry,
one. But
gone off. So you.
But you know, the ferry's great. You go to sleep, you wake up in Holland.
So I genuinely.
What more could you
love
want?
it. Yes, great. So you're at Thomson Morgan. How did your role develop there?
Yeah, well, this guy Martin, he actually left after about a year and a half. He got a directorship at Unwin Seeds, which is
They're like the big rivals.
Yeah, it really was. And so I then was given a lot of his work, and I was working under the main kind of developer in the company, a guy called Keith Sangster, who also ran the breeding site, and I was kind of learning from him, really. And I remember putting together my first catalogue, which I think was 1999, and bringing in, sourcing the product, kind of making sure there was good photography, putting the copy together. When it's quite a skill to write good copy for a catalogue as well. And
you're
I was
speaking to a copywriter,
yeah.
so
And I was taught all this stuff, you know, from the people around me, and it was like a dream job. Amazing.
I've got to say, for someone with an interest, more than an interest, an obsession with horticulture, that is, you kind of fell on your feet quite nicely.
Yeah.
But the key thing is, just to kind of keep this roughly on topic for this podcast, it was something you did that made that. It was entering that competition.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And all the way along, I was kind of just pushing myself to do these different things and different projects. There's one guy that I really thank for it, though, and this was the company also had a kind of side of the business that was young plants. So the main plant side of the business that has now become the dominant side of the business there. And a guy called Paul Hansord, I was working very closely with him and started to put together some of the more specialist catalogues, so clematis catalogue, geranium catalogue, fuchsia catalogue, etc. So I was doing lots of traveling, hunting down these new varieties, bringing it in, looking at the marketing, kind of getting it all ready to go. And it was really fun. Yeah, and there was this whole yearly cycle of the different visits you'd make, what you'd then choose. I was also running the trials where we trialed about 1,000 different plants every year too. But I remember each time there was something new. So it was like, we want you to put some specialist catalogs together. And I'd be like, oh, no, I'm not sure. And it was this guy, Paul Hansord, that was like, oh, you can do that, you know. And I remember I was putting, he wanted me to work on the videos. Not in front of the camera, but behind the camera. We used to create a video catalogue.
What sort of time period is this?
Probably 2000. Yeah.
So that's fairly ahead of its time.
Yeah, it really was. It used to be on an actual video that they would send as if it was a catalogue, so you could then watch the presentation. It really was pioneering. And it was like a really relaxed, lovely program. It wasn't like a shopping TV, edition. It was really, I need to watch some back.
Have you still got some of those tapes?
I've got some DVDs somewhere, but where'd you play DVDs these days?
Well, not quite, yeah.
Oh my gosh. So he pushed me to get involved with that. I was like, oh no, I can't do it. And he was like, no, you can. And I did it. And it was almost like obviously this guy Martin had left pretty quickly. So it wasn't until I was then under this guy Paul's wing that he's the guy that really encouraged me to just always say yes to everything and to say yes, even before someone's finished asking you. And even to this day, I say yes to stuff far too quickly. But that's not a bad thing, because if you can't do it, you kind of work out how you can do it. And that is really nice. Well, and that feeling afterwards is like, whoa, you really pushed yourself. You were kind of like, yeah. So there are many occasions where I'm just sat in a dark room, just kind of swearing at myself. Why did you say yes to this? But then you do it. You can do it.
Why a dark room?
Yeah, I don't know.
Sounded really ominous.
But I really thank this guy Paul for pushing me and believing in myself. And I'm very intolerant with myself now. Like, I don't like to say no to anything, because I believe anything, is possible within time constraints. But yeah, so that kind of happened, and it was great. Yeah.
Okay, so Thomson Morgan, how long were you there? Because you're not there now.
Yeah, so it was 18 years.
18 years?
Yeah, but it wasn't until perhaps the latter years, almost the last 5 years, that I then started to do a bit of the TV and the media work. Mm-hmm. Because remember, we're talking when I joined Thomson Morgan, 18-year-old, shy boy, not confident to do anything, blah, blah, blah. And somewhere in the middle, I kind of gained a confidence, maybe from this kind of encouragement from the staff around me, etc. Just age as well really helps. And and again, this guy Paul, he pushed me and said, "Oh, you should go and sell these products on QVC. You know about them so well. You introduced them. Why couldn't you do that?" And so I was like, "No, I can't do that."
Just for kind of listeners from outside the UK, QVC is. I'm right thinking they were kind of the first shopping channel, weren't they?
I think HSN in US was, but QVC was shortly after, I believe.
Did they start in America?
Yes.
I always assumed QVC was British for some reason.
No, there's US, there's UK, Germany, Italy, Spain. I'm not sure if that's still around. China, Japan.
Wow.
Yeah,
So you
regions.
went from shy 18-year-old Michael putting together catalogues and things to being thrust into television studios, I guess.
Well, yeah. So I was so nervous, and I was like, "Oh my God, I can't do this." Blah blah blah. But then with that sort of thing, of course you're nervous, but then you just get on with it. And there's a point where you then sit there, you look back, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I've been doing this for ages. I quite like it. I'm quite good at it." Oh, there you go. So that is how that started. And because I was also introducing a lot of the new plants, I was often the person that the PR people came to for more information. And when we bought a yellow flowered snowdrop off eBay for £700, it was mostly for PR. The Alan Titchmarsh show rang us up and wanted somebody to go on and talk about this big purchase.
Right.
And we had a big purchase in our history as well with a black hyacinth, which we developed with a company in Holland, and the initial investment was £150,000.
Wow.
So they wanted me to go onto the show, talk about this yellow snowdrop and the black hyacinth, and I had samples to go with, and I was kind of like... so nervous. And I watched the clip now, and this is my first TV appearance, and like anybody else probably wouldn't notice it, but I can see I'm so nervous.
Was this live television?
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you know what? Because I'm very used to live television now, I kind of almost don't notice that these things were live. But
Well, live TV, again, without wishing to, again, make us sound like we're ancient, live TV was a big deal. Certainly when we were kids.
But I guess it's what I was used to. It was the first stuff that I was pushed into. So to me, that was TV. You know?
Okay, so it's safe to say you got a taste for it?
Not initially, I would say. It was just when it then came up at various times. So when we introduced the egg and chips plant, we took some samples down to the One Show. We were on the One Show in a non-speaking role, showing the reveal of the plants. Which other shows? I was called up to do BBC Great British Garden Revival, I think it was called.
Okay.
A special episode about bedding plants, and I helped put that together as well. And it's really fun because it's with Christine Walkden, who I think you probably know, gardening personality.
Oh, possibly.
You should know.
I should know.
And we set up a conveyor belt, so it was like Generation Game with new plants going past all the time, and I explained them really quickly as they went past. It's a really cool clip. I have to show it to you. And that happened as well. And I was obviously then doing more of QVC on the side as that went along. They then sent me to Germany to do QVC as well. And I was dubbed over with a German sexy voice. Also in Italy. I was dubbed over in Italy as well. So, I was starting to do a lot of different kind of TV stuff, and then started social media, and that slowly started to give a presence, really.
So is this while you're still working for Thompson & Morgan?
Yeah, so probably, this is probably my final 4 years there, I would say, because Facebook was starting to become a thing. It was a good way to signpost people to what I was doing, so what I was selling on QVC, kind of messages I wanted to talk about. Always... It's funny because companies have always got a funny relationship with any individual that works for them that have a presence, haven't they? So they were really not always so keen, but knew they couldn't stop me because it was then benefiting them in the long run.
Make money from
but it's always such a weird connection with that sort of thing. And I think from what I've heard since, they've realized that no, you need to encourage people in that way anyway. But regardless, I carried on, and I was building a nice social media profile. I guess at the end of that, company worries you'll become bigger and you want to leave. So that's what happened, obviously. But and what happened? I started a website, I think initially to do some coverage for a charity trek that I did in Costa Rica, to put a diary up about that. And it just developed from there, really. And the website now has become really big, and after lockdown we've had like many visitors per day. It's really, really cool. And I just sort of built all of that up, and then eventually I enjoyed my job, don't get me wrong, but with that kind of yearly cycle of introducing new products, it was kind of like I was really looking for a bit more of a mixed portfolio of work.
Well, if you'd been through that cycle 18 times.
Yeah, as fun as it is. Yeah. And also, I think when a company gets bigger and more complex, it's harder to kind of make the things happen that you want and need to. Mm-hmm. So like when I was there doing the 1999 catalog, that was, I was selecting the product, putting it in, it was being listed, but there was a lot more hoops to go through in later years, which it's a shame because I understand, but it also inhibits a company as well. So,
yeah, and I can see that.
Yeah. Okay. So what did I do then? So I slowly felt more confident to do some stuff on the side. I was working with a new app called Garden Tags.
Yep, I know Garden Tags.
Which you remember. Also started doing some consultancy work with Seedball, I think it was. And kind of generally feeling the ground and knowing that I could get other work. Because you've got to remember, I was in a very developmental role and the notice period was 6 months.
6 months?
6 months. That's quite crippling and difficult. So, so I kind of like did that. And actually, I have to say, the person that inspired me to actually kind of, not throw in the towel, that sounds really negative, but to finally, make that move into freelance was actually my partner, Rafal, who I've mentioned to you from time to time, who we've been together about 5 years now. And we initially met when he was living in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. And he's from Poland. He then lived in China for 2 years. He'd moved to Amsterdam. I kind of looked at that and I was like, oh, that's really how I want to be. Kind of this like carefree, kind of to move anywhere and just throw yourself into a different life. And I'd had 18 years of comfort and not really felt to do that. And I think seeing how he'd done it really inspired me.
See, that this is the big brave thing. This is the thing that the first reason I want to come and speak to you is just because we know each other and generally quite entertaining when we get to talk. But that decision to kind of move from the safe paycheck, the safe thing. Yeah. So you were inspired by seeing somebody else who'd made it happen.
I think so, yeah. And I guess a lot of other stuff had fallen into place that made that happen. So obviously I felt more confident in myself. I'd kind of found fatigue with the role that I was doing, but also I knew side roles were happening. I knew there was other stuff out there and people that would be interested in me if I was to leave. And I'd had some early conversations with Suttons who were a rival as well. And so there was a lot of stuff that could then happen. So that was really nice.
So it wasn't quite, you weren't quite kind of just looking at a complete blank nothingness.
No, not at all. And to be honest, not to be boastful, but I never have, but
I think that's perception a lot of the time.
Yeah, maybe.
I know, obviously I know your career and I know you've stayed busy, but I think a lot of people either see the opportunities, whether they've taken them or whether they've fully formed and fleshed them out, and some people just don't. Yeah. I think almost anyone can leave a job they hate and find something to do. Mm-hmm. I think it's perception. You're kind of being very blasé about there being opportunity, but it's how you see it.
It is also a positive attitude as well, and the way that you behave too. Because I would say, moving on to like freelance world, how it's gone for me is I get called back for work because I fundamentally do what I'll say I do, do it well, do it on time, turn up for a meeting on time. All of this stuff is really simple, but many people get that wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Many people will be like, oh, can I give it to you tomorrow? Or, oh, sorry, I'm 10 minutes late. It's like, no.
No, I've known some people see being freelance, which is essentially what you are. Although you kind of have
you've still got to be reliable.
This sort of portfolio career, I think it's safe to say. And I think people see being freelance as an excuse to get out of bed at 11 o'clock in the morning and do things when you want. I think the reality of being freelance, which has come up several times during these podcast episodes, is that you're actually under more obligation to perform.
Oh, yeah.
You don't get appraisals. You don't get kind of ticked off by the boss. But if you don't perform, it's much, much easier for that phone not to ring.
Which is so much harder, but there's so much more thrill to that as well. There really is. And it's so fundamental. Just be reliable. And that is where so many people go wrong. And And I'm convinced that's why I get asked back to do stuff, and also not just asked back to do stuff, but recommended to do other stuff as well. And it's been, I've been freelance for maybe 4.5 years.
Is that all? Because I've only sort of, I think I only got to know you once you'd started being freelance.
Yeah. And I was, at what point did because first of all, everything was a bit kind of messy, and I had a website called Plant Hunter, which you'll remember. I also had a Twitter profile, which was Gardening Greek, but then I was something different on Instagram or blah, blah, blah. And I remember sitting with my partner, Rafal, in the apartment in New York one night, trying to decide what the brand could be. And of course, what's the time? Sorry, there is a relevance to New York because we were obviously at the time when we were working it out was in a different time zone to UK. So I then could change all the profiles without anybody seeing necessarily, and then emerge the next day as Mr Plant Geek. So that's kind of roughly what happened, and it just kind of summed it up really, and it made it clean, and Rafal helped with a logo, and it just became something a bit more tangible, really.
It's certainly, by the time that I became aware of the brand, you had something you could hang a hat on.
Yeah.
It was a thing.
But it's something that people recognise you for. So if I meet people in real life, at a trade show, that follow me online, they're kind of like, Mr Plant Geek. It's like if my name was just, John Smith, they wouldn't be, it's John Smith.
It's really, really important.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm doing this podcast as Andrew Culture, and that's not my real name, but the reason it exists is because of personal branding, and it's always been a personal brand that I've used for well over 20 years. And people who know me through my other work, I run a digital marketing agency, SEO agency called Andrew Laws Associates, and people who know me through that, when they see me post a lot of the social personal branding things, say on Facebook or whatever, they rib it mercilessly. They really rip me to pieces over it. Well, because I'll if I'm interviewed for someone's podcast, I will naturally put it on my Facebook wall because that's it's the way it all works. We all help each other
but
out.
These are your friends that are ripping you, or
no? Sometimes it's professional no one who's a direct client of mine, but and they're like, kind of showing off again, are you? And
I hate that attitude.
I never defend it because. For one thing, I've never understood why showing off was a bad thing.
Well, do you know what? I've been showing off for 4.5 years, and it's done me all right.
Well, I think it's just what you have to do. Yeah, no matter what you do.
Because that's your shop window.
Yeah.
Social media is your shop window, and I've never been ashamed to show what I'm up to, what I'm doing, what announcements there are. You'll have a small amount of people that are then tinged with jealousy. But you'll usually find out that they're your closer friends. So almost... I've done this a couple of times. It's worth blocking your friends from those social media profiles because...
Oh, really? I'd never thought of that.
Because, I know it sounds really silly, but you're there to do business, So for many years, I never used my personal Facebook, for any business stuff because it's kind of personal side.
This is why I had Andrew Laws and Andrew Culture. It was a clear separation between the two.
Yeah, but... Yeah, I would say, just block anyone that gives you hassle. You just got to block them because what have they got to say?
I've got to do it sometimes because sometimes I'll post something and over the last 6 months or so, I've just completely merged the two things. There is now, I realise that whoever I'm going to work with, they have to know me rather than know this kind of brand I've developed. But I'm going to have to start blocking because sometimes I'll post something and one of your good friends will just start kind of tons of abuse or like bants as they might call it.
That's
and I'm
weird,
looking at it thinking, and it's I'm not saying anyone's being mean, but I do look at it and think, just don't do that because there are people here who might actually hire me for work. And whilst you're going to your job somewhere and you're fairly safe unless you burn the place down or something, if this sort of thing starts to carry on, I could end up not having any food or any money to
and you've
pay
said that
mortgage.
To them? Or?
No, I haven't.
Not quite at that stage.
I think I should, but I think the idea of posting stuff publicly but blocking your friends, I think that's actually quite an interesting concept.
Yeah, because you're not there to advertise to them, and they don't want you to advertise to them. So there you go, perfect solution. Whether you tell them beforehand or not is another issue, but
that's a pretty good bit of advice. Well, we've talked much longer than I meant to, but it's been enjoyable.
It's really cool
Michael.
though,
and I think it's kind of Michael also works with Jen, who's one of my colleagues as well, and whenever I kind of want to get hold of Michael for whatever reason, I always have to ask which country you're in. So what have you got planned? Obviously, COVID has kind of chucked a spanner in the works with a lot of things, but what have you got planned for the rest of the year?
I don't know.
Fair enough. Okay.
No, I said to you earlier, I never plan ahead that much. I just kind of roll with stuff as it happens because I believe it's better to be reactive in that way. So I know that I tend to organise my diary perhaps 2 months in advance. I know there probably aren't any QVC shows much to the end of the year, but I have got a really nice, what would you call it? Oh, that dirty word, influencer project with Rouse Honey.
Okay.
Which is really interesting and nice amount of money as well.
Again, look, you're being apologetic.
I know.
I don't think
that's
you
a really
need to
English
be.
thing, isn't it?
It is, and you've made this happen. We were talking kind of before I hit record about kind of some grief that you can come under. Not, I don't mean you. I don't mean listeners. I'm not saying Michael. I'm saying me. I'm saying anyone who does start to gain some a following or piques people interest. Is that people can get really snippy about it, and the reality is no one stumbles and falls into any sort of profile. You make this as much as if you start working in, I don't want to make it sound like I'm crapping on any other career at all, but if you went to go start working at the bank and you decided that, I'm working at the lowest level now, by the time I'm 40 I want to run this bank. If you worked your way through that, you will have done it yourself, absolutely through hard work, and if you became the bank manager, I think your friends probably and other people probably wouldn't piss on you so much. That's all we're doing with personal branding. We are working hard to keep ourselves in work. And I think should be shown some damn respect, frankly.
Just block the friends, that's it.
So that kind of wasn't, that sort of turned in, I'm apologising now, that turned into, I find it frustrating though, because it's not even an ego thing. It's look, this is how I stay in work.
It is. It's worth a short paragraph on knowing your worth as well, because it takes a while to realize what you can charge, and it's hard sometimes because you don't want someone to be like, oh my god, that's far too much. But you will have that from time to time, but you've got to obviously cover your costs and know what you're worth with, your fees and stuff. And sometimes you'll send an email and you almost like close your eyes and press send because you're like, no, that sounds like too much.
Do you feel guilty when you say how much money you want?
I don't feel guilty, but my motive is I want them to say yes. So I don't want them to say yes too quickly if I'm too cheap, or I don't want them to say no.
One of the best bits of advice I got is from a friend called Max Shelley, who may or may not listen to this. He said, you should get turned down 1 out of 3 times for being too expensive. And I think that is pretty good advice, actually.
That's cool. But do you know what? Also, something else, I never dwell on any turn downs. Or kind of when someone says no. I think I do that by keeping myself really full. So there's always lots going on. There's always lots of projects on. So if something drops off or someone says no, you're not sitting around mourning that. You've kind of got enough that is then not sustaining you, but just kind of keeping you interested and stimulated.
This is one of the things negative. This is one of the things that I think it makes me feel more secure as a freelancer. Because I have friends who kind of say, I wish I could be freelance, but no, it would be too scary not to have that income. And my response is always, you could be made redundant and then it's all gone temporarily,
but
because other stuff's out there.
A lot of friends that I've had that were made redundant, it was often the best blessing they had. I think because then it forces them to
everybody I know who's been redundant, and we're kids. We were kids of I was a kid of the 80s. So now I found out how much older I am than you. But I've lived through 5, 6, possibly 7 recessions now.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I was born in the mid-70s, so I've been around, and I'm now in the situation where when I was a kid, it was really unusual if someone you knew had been made redundant. It was almost freakish, like a rumour would spread around the village or the town or whatever. Now, I'm hard pushed to think of, I'd say at least 50% of my friends have been made redundant. And it is almost overwhelmingly positive. It's very rare.
It sets you free, and it's likely the person chosen to be made redundant is someone that didn't fit into the role anyway, perhaps. I know there's a lot of different reasons, but I think it's really a good thing.
It is, and neither of us are being flippant. I've been made redundant, and that was how I got my first.
I
job
haven't,
in the
but
city.
sometimes I wished I had, because then I wouldn't have 6 months notice period.
Well, I say 18 years. That is a significant amount of time to kind of stick at a job. But jobs are good. I'm not just I'm not saying no one should be an employee.
It was because I enjoyed it. That was the bottom line, and because I was doing something that was my hobby as well as my career, and I know not everyone's lucky enough to have that, but
everybody can have that.
Yeah, true.
I can't think of many hobbies or passions that you couldn't turn into.
But the bottom line also
amateur surgery. I don't know.
But the bottom line also is I don't know what else I could do. I don't know what else I'm good at.
See, it's really straightforward for me. I'm a musician. And the way of the world is I'm not going to make enough money as a musician to get by, but I also love the whole geekery of SEO and digital marketing. So I'm perfectly happy kind of doing this. But no, I think a lot of people, there's always a way. There really is. And I think, you're proof of that. And I've been freelance for 20 years now. And I say literally shit if I can do it. And, I don't like to dwell too much on it, but I left school with nothing. Which was, to be fair, was a squandered opportunity. I'm not proud of that fact, but you can make things. Everyone has the ability to make things, make your own life. It's a game. You're not going to get to the end and get a scorecard and someone saying, "No, you should have stayed in." I think I wouldn't want to be on my deathbed and go, "Do you know what? I wish I'd got a job at the council." And no, again, I'm not. My whole family's worked at the council. I'm not crapping on them. But I wouldn't. I don't think I'm ever going to
block your friends. They won't know the podcast's out anyway.
Yeah,
so you'll be all right.
That's you're showing your kind of presenter kind of chops there by coming back round to something that was popular. Right, Michael, I'm going to have to wrap it up. I think this could kind of roll on forever. So, I know your brands, I know your websites. Can you tell the listeners, please?
Yeah, sure. So if you hop on mrplantgeek.com, you'll see all the links to my social media as well. And you can also subscribe to a mailing list. So
cool.
All sorts of stuff going on there, and there's interesting articles, kind of nice perennial articles as well, giving you plant advice and giving you lots of inspiration.
I can personally recommend something of a... I don't want to be... I'm going to slightly unkindly call it a sideshow, but one of Michael's brands is Rude Botany.
Oh, yeah. Didn't even talk about these different brands.
Well, to be fair, you point people at your primary... go with my work head on for a minute. You point people at your primary brand and they find the others after that. But Rude Botany, if nothing else, make sure you look up Rude Botany. It's well worth it.
Part of my obsession of getting people from different demographics in, and you get them in through humour and things that look like penises.
There you go. Common ground. There you go. Right, okay. So thank you ever so much, Michael. I really appreciate your time. And next time you're in Europe or somewhere nearby, I think I'll probably have to get you back on. So
okay, awesome.
I'm going to wrap it up and I'm going to say goodbye now. Would you like to say goodbye?
Bye.
Well, that's the end of this one. So, what do you think? Do you like it? I hope so. This is the kind of bit that you might be able to tell I just use the same bit every time because, well, it's not so much lazy as efficient, but this is the bit where I say smash the like button or stab at it or actually just stroke it gently. Be nice. Why would you be so aggressive? But please like, please subscribe, and please rank, rate, tell everyone this. These kind of things, I assume they matter. Everyone else says them. But there you go. So endeth this episode of the Andrew Culture podcast. If you want to know more about what I get up to, go have a look at andrewculture.com, because I won't bore you with it here. Anyway, until the next time, keep it cool, stand in a dry place, or do what you want. I'm not your boss. Bye.
We don't know for sure. Weather can be changeable.